My name is Gwendolyn, and at 33 years old, I never imagined my own sister would try to end my unborn child's life. I was 6 months pregnant when my sister kicked me in the stomach at our mother's birthday party. "This is what you get for thinking you are better than family," she screamed, her designer heel connecting with my swollen belly. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air as the life inside me suddenly went completely silent. Before panic could fully set in, my husband stepped forward. "You just committed a felony in front of a federal judge," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze the room. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect yourself from a toxic family member. To understand how my mother's 60th birthday dinner turned into an active crime scene, you have to understand the family I grew up in. We were gathered at the exclusive Oakwood Country Club in the suburbs of Chicago to celebrate my mother Barbara turning 60. The private dining room was draped in expensive gold and white floral arrangements paid for entirely by my husband David and me. Yet as usual, my younger sister Vanessa was the absolute center of attention. Vanessa was 30 years old, a self-proclaimed luxury fashion influencer and boutique owner who lived a life of flashy sports cars and constant social media bragging. Her husband Terrence, a brilliant and hard-working African-American architect, sat quietly beside her. Terrence was a genuinely good man who ran a nonprofit organization building homes for military veterans, and I often wondered how he tolerated Vanessa's constant need for the spotlight and her staggering arrogance. My husband David sat beside me, his hand resting protectively on my chair. David was a sitting judge on the federal district court, a man of immense intellect and quiet lethal authority. The main course of filet mignon had just been cleared when Vanessa clinked her champagne glass with a silver spoon. The room quieted down with everyone expecting a touching toast to our mother. Instead, Vanessa turned her piercing gaze directly onto me. "Gwendolyn," she announced loudly, ensuring the neighboring tables of my mother's wealthy country club friends could hear every word. "I am expanding my fashion boutique to a second location, and I need immediate capital. Mom and Dad agree that you should sign over your portion of the college trust fund to me." The sheer audacity of her demand left me momentarily speechless. Our late grandmother had left a $300,000 educational trust fund specifically designated for my future children. It was legally mine, locked away for the baby currently kicking in my womb. I placed my water glass down carefully on the white linen tablecloth. "No, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "That money is secured for my unborn child. You cannot have it." My mother Barbara slammed her hand against the heavy mahogany table, rattling the crystal glasses. "Do not be so incredibly selfish, Gwendolyn," she snapped, her face flushing with anger. "You sit in a cubicle all day doing boring tax returns. You do not need that kind of money. Your sister is building a legitimate fashion empire. She had to hustle to build her brand while your father and I wasted our savings on your useless accounting degree. You owe this family for everything we have done for you." I looked at my mother, feeling a familiar hollow ache in my chest. For my entire life, Vanessa had been the golden child, allowed to take whatever she wanted, while I was expected to quietly step aside and sacrifice my own happiness. My parents, Barbara and William, consistently enabled her worst behavior, treating me like a disappointing outcast, simply because I did not crave public attention. But I was no longer a timid child seeking their approval. What my family did not know was that I did not just process boring tax returns. I was a senior forensic accountant for the United States Department of Justice. I spent my days working undercover to dismantle international money laundering rings. My family thought I was a low-level clerk because my federal security clearance required strict confidentiality. I looked at Vanessa, who was smirking at me triumphantly. Her hand was resting on a bright pink designer handbag she had been flaunting all evening to anyone who would look. "If your fashion empire is so overwhelmingly successful, Vanessa," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room, "why are you carrying a counterfeit bag?" Her smug smirk vanished instantly, replaced by wide-eyed shock. "What are you talking about?" she stammered defensively. "This is a limited edition piece from Paris. It cost me $12,000. I shook my head slowly, utilizing the same attention to detail I used when auditing criminal bank accounts. The stitching on the handles is completely uneven. The luxury hardware is stamped slightly off-center, and that particular colorway was never released with silver zippers by the designer. It is a cheap overseas knockoff, Vanessa. Just like the fake wealthy image you project online. Several of my mother's wealthy friends gasped, whispering behind their hands and staring at Vanessa's bag. The public humiliation broke something dark and violent inside my sister. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Before anyone could react, she lunged across the space separating our chairs. Terrence shouted her name, reaching out desperately to grab her arm, but he was too late. Vanessa swung her leg with brutal force, her pointed designer heel driving directly into the side of my pregnant belly. The physical impact knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. I crumpled to the floor, wrapping my arms tightly around my stomach in sheer agony. A searing, blinding pain shot through my pelvis. But what terrified me more than the physical pain was the sudden absolute stillness from the baby inside me. My child, who had been actively kicking just moments before, went completely silent. David was beside me in a fraction of a second. He did not yell or lose his temper like a normal person might. Instead, he radiated an aura of terrifying, calculated power. He caught my head before it could hit the hard marble floor, his eyes scanning my pale face for signs of consciousness. Then he pulled his phone from his suit jacket without ever taking his eyes off my sister. "Dispatch, this is Federal District Judge David Hayes," he said, his voice echoing in the horrified silence of the dining room. "Send multiple units and an emergency ambulance to the Oakwood Country Club immediately. I am pressing felony aggravated assault charges on a woman who just attacked my pregnant wife. I am the primary witness, and the suspect is not leaving this room." The chaotic hum of the emergency room barely registered over the ringing in my ears. I lay on a rigid hospital gurney, staring blankly at the fluorescent lights blurring above me. The sharp metallic scent of antiseptic filled my nose, mingling with the coppery tang of blood. My hands were pressed tightly against my swollen 6-month pregnant belly, waiting for a flutter, a kick, anything. There was only an agonizing, terrifying stillness. My parents, Richard and Patricia, burst through the swinging double doors of the ER. They did not rush to my bedside. They did not ask the attending physician about their unborn grandchild. Instead, my mother marched directly to the foot of my bed, her face flushed, her expensive silk scarf askew. "She is in a holding cell wearing an orange jumpsuit because of your pathetic jealousy," Patricia hissed, her voice slicing through the frantic noise of the emergency room. Her finger jabbed aggressively in my direction. "Drop the charges right now, Gwendolyn. Drop the charges, or we will mortgage our house to bail Sabrina out and we will disown you permanently." My father, Richard, stood slightly behind her, nodding in fervent agreement, his jaw set in a hard line. "Family protects family," he muttered, entirely oblivious to the irony of his statement as I lay bleeding on a hospital bed because of his favored daughter. I looked at them, the exhaustion and pain momentarily eclipsed by a cold, familiar anger. This was not the first time they had demanded I sacrifice myself to shield Sabrina from the consequences of her own actions. "Just like you disowned me when I refused to take out fraudulent loans in my name to fund her fake fashion business 5 years ago," I retorted, my voice hoarse but steady. "You threw me out of the house then because I would not commit financial suicide for her. And now you expect me to drop felony assault charges?" Patricia scoffed, rolling her eyes as if my near miscarriage was a minor inconvenience. "It was a simple accident. Sabrina just lost her balance. You are blowing this completely out of proportion to ruin her life because you have always envied her success." The rhythmic, high-pitched beeping of the fetal monitor suddenly broke the tension. A wave of profound, indescribable relief washed over me as the nurse adjusted the transducer and the strong, steady, galloping sound of my baby's heartbeat finally filled the small, curtained area. I squeezed my eyes shut, a single tear escaping, releasing the breath I felt I had been holding since the moment Sabrina's heel connected with my stomach. I opened my eyes, the lingering fear evaporating, replaced by a sharp, calculated clarity. I glared at my parents, the people who were currently attempting to bully me while I was strapped to medical equipment. "You cannot mortgage your house, Mom," I said, the corners of my mouth turning up in a humorless smile. "You seem to have forgotten that I am the primary name on that deed." Patricia froze, the self-righteous indignation draining from her face. "What are you talking about?" I shifted slightly, wincing at the dull ache in my side, but keeping my gaze locked on hers. "You ruined your credit paying off Sabrina's first bankruptcy 3 years ago. You came begging to me, the daughter you disowned, because the bank was going to foreclose. I bailed you out, and my name went on the deed to secure the refinancing. If you try to leverage my equity to post bail for the woman who just tried to kill my child, I will report you to the bank for wire fraud before the ink is even dry." Patricia stood frozen at the foot of my hospital bed, the color completely draining from her perfectly contoured face. Her mouth opened and closed twice before she could formulate a response. "You are lying," she finally stammered, gripping her expensive leather purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. "We paid off that mortgage years ago." "You paid off the original loan," Nathaniel corrected her, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute silence in the sterile emergency room. "But when you faced bankruptcy 3 years ago, Gwendolyn bailed you out. The refinancing agreement clearly lists her as the primary equity holder. If you attempt to leverage that property to secure a bail bond for Sabrina, I will personally ensure the bank flags it as a fraudulent transaction. You will be facing federal wire fraud charges before the sun comes up." Richard grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her back. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief, realizing their usual tactics of bullying and financial manipulation were entirely useless against us. "You are dead to us." He spat out, his face purple with rage. "We will find the money. Family always finds a way." They turned and stormed out of the emergency room, leaving behind a trail of heavy perfume and shattered illusions. I leaned back against the stiff hospital pillows, my hand resting gently on my stomach, where my baby was finally safe. Nathaniel sat beside me, kissing my forehead. "They are desperate," he noted quietly, opening his laptop. "Desperate people make careless mistakes." For the next 24 hours, I remained under strict medical observation. The doctors wanted to ensure the trauma to my abdomen had not caused any unseen complications for the baby. Nathaniel never left my side. He turned the small hospital room into a makeshift command center, his fingers flying across his keyboard as he monitored the legal filings regarding Sabrina's arrest. On the second afternoon, his typing abruptly stopped. He stared at the screen, a deep frown creasing his forehead. "She made bail," he announced, his tone laced with absolute disbelief. $500,000 paid in full via a private bond agency just 20 minutes ago. I pushed myself up on my elbows, wincing at the dull ache in my side. "That is impossible. Mom and Dad are drowning in debt from maintaining their country club lifestyle. They do not have $500,000 in liquid assets, and I blocked their access to the house equity. Where did they get that kind of cash overnight?" Nathaniel made a rapid phone call to a colleague at the courthouse, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When he hung up, his eyes were dark with fury. "They did not use their own money," he explained, turning his laptop screen toward me. "They went through a shadow lender, a predatory financial firm operating out of a strip mall known to have direct ties to Eastern European organized crime syndicates, and they used collateral to secure the cash." "But what collateral?" I asked, my heart pounding, as my forensic accounting instincts kicked into high gear. "They have nothing left to give. They used Donovan," Nathaniel replied grimly. "Or rather, they used his architectural firm. The bond documents list Donovan's commercial properties and his nonprofit business accounts as the primary guarantors for the loan." I stared at him in horror. Donovan was an incredibly talented African-American architect who spent half his time designing luxury commercial buildings and the other half running a highly successful charity that built mortgage-free homes for disabled veterans. He was the most honest, hard-working man I knew. He would never risk his life's work to bail out a woman who just assaulted a pregnant relative. They forged his signature. I realized the sheer magnitude of their crime washing over me. Sabrina and my parents forged Donovan's name to borrow money from the mob. Before Nathaniel could respond, the heavy wooden door to my hospital room swung open, hitting the wall with a loud thud. The emergency protective order we had filed explicitly forbade Sabrina from coming anywhere near me. Yet there she stood in the doorway, blatantly violating a federal judge's mandate just an hour after her release. She had changed out of her county jail jumpsuit and was back in her designer clothes, though her hair was uncharacteristically messy and her makeup was smudged. She wore a smug, arrogant grin, acting as if she had just won a minor inconvenience, rather than facing serious felony charges. Donovan stood right behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. He looked completely exhausted, his eyes wide with confusion and deep concern. It was instantly clear that Sabrina had spun a massive web of lies to explain her arrest. She had played the victim, manipulating her husband into believing this was all a terrible familial misunderstanding. "Look who is still playing the fragile victim," Sabrina sneered, stepping into the room with complete disregard for the boundaries of the law. "You really thought a night in a holding cell would break me. You thought you could lock me away. My defense attorney charges $1,000 an hour. He is going to crush your little assault charges in court. He is already drafting a countersuit claiming you attacked me first and I acted in self-defense. You are going to look like a hysterical, hormonal liar." Donovan stepped forward gently, pulling Sabrina back by her arm. "Sabrina, please stop," he pleaded softly. He looked at me, his face full of genuine remorse. "Gwendolyn, I am so incredibly sorry about all of this. Sabrina told me you two got into a heated argument about the trust fund, and things escalated accidentally. I know her business has been stressing her out, and she said your pregnancy hormones made the argument spiral out of control. We do not want to see anyone go to jail over a family dispute. Please let us just handle this privately and get you both some help." He actually believed her. He stood there, a good, honorable man, trying to protect a wife who had just betrayed him in the most unimaginable way possible. Nathaniel stood up from his chair. His imposing height and the sheer weight of his judicial authority instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the room. He did not raise his voice. He did not engage with Sabrina's childish taunts. He walked calmly over to his briefcase, pulled out a thick manila folder containing the freshly printed bond documents and stepped directly in front of Donovan. "Donovan, you are a good man," Nathaniel said, his voice quiet but echoing with devastating finality. "I need you to look at page 4 of this file. Sabrina did not just assault my wife in a fit of stress. In order to get out of jail today, she and Richard forged your signature to secure a $500,000 loan from a shell company tied directly to the Russian mob." Donovan's brow furrowed in confusion. He took the heavy folder from Nathaniel's hands and flipped to the 4th page. I watched as his eyes scanned the legal documentation, tracing the lines of the fraudulent loan agreement and the blatantly forged signature guaranteeing his architectural firm as collateral. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him standing in the middle of the hospital room staring at the paper as if it had just caught fire in his hands. The suffocating silence in the hospital room was finally broken by a sharp, authoritative voice from the doorway. "Sabrina, you are under arrest for violating federal money laundering statutes." The voice rang out clear and unwavering. 2 United States Marshals stepped into the room, their dark suits a stark contrast to the sterile white walls of the hospital. They bypassed the local hospital security completely, their badges gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. One of them held up a piece of paper, the federal warrant already signed and sealed. Sabrina's smug smirk instantly evaporated, replaced by wide-eyed panic. She stumbled backward, bumping into a tray of medical supplies, sending metal instruments clattering to the floor. "What are you talking about?" she shrieked, her voice pitching up in a frantic, desperate crescendo. "I have not laundered anything. This is a mistake. My sister is just an accountant. She is lying to you to get back at me." I sat up slightly in my hospital bed, wincing at the pain in my side but refusing to look away. "No, Sabrina. I am not lying," I said, my voice eerily calm against her mounting hysteria. "And I am not just an accountant. As I told you, I am a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Justice. I have been tracking the financial anomalies in your luxury boutique for 8 long months. You thought you were so clever moving cash through shell companies, but you leave a digital footprint a mile wide. The FBI is literally boxing up your counterfeit inventory as we speak. My parents, Richard and Patricia, who had been lingering in the hallway, rushed back into the room upon hearing the commotion. Patricia's jaw dropped as she took in the scene. The U.S. Marshals closing in on her golden child, the federal warrant, the undeniable reality that Sabrina's perfectly curated life was a complete fraud. This cannot be happening. Richard muttered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked at me, panic mingling with the usual disdain. Gwendolyn, you need to fix this. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. You cannot send your own sister to federal prison. I turned my gaze to him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold resolve. I am not sending her anywhere, Dad. She sent herself the moment she decided to use Donovan's charity as a tax shelter to wash cartel money. At the mention of his charity, Donovan, who had been standing frozen near the window, finally moved. The file Nathaniel had handed him was still clutched in his trembling hands. The realization of what his wife had done had fully set in, and the devastation on his face was profound. He looked at Sabrina, not with anger, but with an overwhelming soul-crushing grief. I built homes for veterans, Donovan said, his voice breaking. He took a slow, deliberate step toward Sabrina. I poured my heart into that foundation. I worked 60-hour weeks to make sure disabled soldiers had a place to live. And you used it to clean dirty money. You used my life's work as a front for a cartel. Sabrina reached out to him, her hands shaking. Donovan, baby, please, she pleaded, her voice cracking. I can explain. It is not what it looks like. I was just trying to build our empire. I wanted us to have the best of everything. I did it for us. For us, Donovan repeated the words sounding like a curse. You forged my signature on a $500,000 loan from the Russian mob. You put my firm, my charity, my entire life on the line so you could play at being a successful entrepreneur. We are done, Sabrina. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his gold wedding band, and threw it hard onto the linoleum floor. The ring bounced once, twice before rolling under my hospital bed. The metallic clinking sound echoed loudly in the tense silence of the room. Patricia lunged forward, her hand flying out to slap Donovan hard across the face. How dare you! She screamed, her perfectly manicured nails leaving angry red marks on his cheek. You ungrateful bastard! Sabrina gave you a life you could never have dreamed of on an architect's salary. You are going to stand by her, or I swear to God I will ruin you. Donovan did not even flinch. He looked at Patricia with a calm, chilling detachment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He did not call the police. He called his own attorney. Yes, Marcus, it is Donovan. He said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. I need you to file for emergency divorce proceedings immediately. And I need you to contact the federal prosecutor's office. I am turning over all of my wife's business records, laptops, and security tokens. I am fully cooperating with the government as a whistleblower. Sabrina let out a guttural, animalistic scream. She lunged at Donovan, her hands raised like claws, but Nathaniel stepped swiftly between them, grabbing her wrists in a vice-like grip. That is enough, Sabrina, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the full weight of a federal judge. Do not make this worse for yourself. The U.S. Marshals moved in immediately, pulling Sabrina away from Nathaniel. They spun her around, forcing her arms behind her back, the metallic click of the handcuffs finalizing her downfall. Sabrina, you have the right to remain silent. One of the marshals began reading her rights, his voice a steady drone over her continued screaming. As they marched her out of the hospital room, Sabrina thrashed against their grip, her designer heels slipping on the polished floor. She looked back at me one last time, her face twisted in absolute fury. You planned this, she shrieked. You planned all of this because you are a jealous, pathetic loser. You are nothing without me. You hear me? Nothing. I watched her disappear down the hallway, the sound of her screaming fading as the elevator doors closed. I rested my hand on my stomach, feeling a small, reassuring flutter from the baby. I am exactly who I need to be, I whispered to the empty doorway. And you are going to federal prison. 3 weeks passed since the heavy double doors of the hospital closed behind the United States Marshals. I was confined to strict bed rest in the master bedroom of our home, ordered by my obstetrician to keep my blood pressure down and protect the baby. Sabrina was sitting in a federal detention center, her requests for bail repeatedly denied due to her brazen flight risk and ties to international syndicates. Donovan had successfully filed for emergency divorce and was currently under federal protection, working daily with my colleagues at the Department of Justice to map out every shell company Sabrina had used to infect his charity. I shifted against the pillows, trying to find a comfortable position for my aching side, and aimed the remote at the television. I flipped to a national morning talk show, expecting the usual mundane celebrity gossip to distract me from the lingering pain. Instead, the faces of my own parents filled the high-definition screen. Richard and Patricia were sitting on a plush studio couch, looking like the picture of devastated, hard-working American parents. Patricia was dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue, while Richard held her hand tightly, playing the role of the fiercely protective patriarch. The chyron flashing in bold red letters at the bottom of the screen read, "Federal judge accused of framing sister-in-law to steal family fortune." The host leaned forward with an expression of manufactured sympathy, asking how their family was coping with such an unprecedented tragedy. Patricia stared directly into the camera, her voice quivering with flawless theatrical distress. "My youngest daughter Sabrina is an innocent victim," she sobbed, clutching Richard's hand closer to her chest. She built a highly successful luxury fashion brand from scratch, working day and night to achieve the American dream. But my oldest daughter Gwendolyn has always been consumed by bitter, deep-seated jealousy. Gwendolyn married a federal judge, a man with far too much unchecked power, and together they orchestrated a fake federal raid to steal Sabrina's company. Richard nodded gravely, adopting a tone of righteous indignation that made my blood boil. "We gave Gwendolyn everything," he declared to millions of viewers. "We paid for her education, we supported her when she was just a low-level clerk, struggling to make ends meet, and this is how she repays our generosity." She and her corrupt husband had our Sabrina locked up in a federal cage without bail just to seize our family assets. They are using the United States justice system as their own personal weapon because Gwendolyn could never handle being second best. I stared at the screen, my hands clenching the bedsheets until my knuckles turned white. The absolute sheer delusion was staggering. They were sitting on national television, blatantly lying to the public, trying to spin a massive federal money laundering and racketeering indictment into a soapy family drama about a jealous sister. They were deliberately ignoring the fact that Sabrina had violently kicked a heavily pregnant woman, forged legal documents to borrow $500,000 from the Russian mob, and hijacked a charity for disabled veterans. They were entirely focused on destroying my husband's immaculate career to save their golden child, completely oblivious to the legal avalanche they were bringing down upon themselves. The fallout from their televised performance was instantaneous and aggressive. Within hours, the interview went viral across every major social media platform. People who knew absolutely nothing about the law, the cartel ties, or the facts of the case eagerly devoured the narrative of a corrupt, power-hungry federal judge abusing his position to steal a small business. My phone began lighting up with rapid-fire notifications. News helicopters started circling our quiet neighborhood, their blades chopping loudly through the morning air. Local news channels cut to live footage outside the federal courthouse downtown. Dozens of angry protesters had already gathered on the courthouse steps, waving hastily painted signs demanding Nathaniel be investigated, disbarred, and arrested immediately. The screen of my phone lit up with a direct text message from my mother. It was not a message of maternal concern or a plea for reconciliation. It was a cold, calculated threat designed to break me. The text read, "Drop the DOJ probe right now. Tell your federal friends you made a mistake and get Sabrina out of that cell today. If you do not drop the charges by tomorrow morning, we will go to every major news network in the country and ruin Nathaniel's career permanently. You will both be left with nothing. Family always wins. I read the message twice, my heart pounding a steady, angry rhythm against my ribs. I did not reply. As a forensic accountant, I was trained to look at hard evidence, not emotional manipulation. I knew exactly what they were trying to do, and I knew exactly why it was going to fail spectacularly. The sound of the front door unlocking echoed up the stairs. Heavy, measured footsteps climbed the hardwood steps with a calm, unhurried rhythm. Nathaniel walked into the master bedroom. He did not look like a man whose career was supposedly crumbling under a national media smear campaign. He looked completely unbothered, exuding the same terrifying quiet authority he carried when presiding over his courtroom. He walked over to the bed, gently loosened his silk tie, and leaned down to press a warm, lingering kiss to my forehead. "How is the baby today?" he asked softly, his large hand resting gently on my stomach. I showed him the text message from Patricia and pointed to the muted television, which was still broadcasting live footage of the angry mob shouting outside his courthouse. "They think they can play the media," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "They are trying to destroy your reputation to force my hand and get Sabrina released." Nathaniel glanced at the television screen, a dark, predatory smile curving the corners of his mouth. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and tossed it casually onto the armchair. "They think they are fighting a public relations battle," Nathaniel said, his voice a low, lethal hum that promised absolute ruin. "They think going on a morning talk show gives them leverage over a federal investigation. But they just went on national television and brazenly broadcast their intent to interfere with an active Department of Justice operation." He picked up my phone, read Patricia's threatening text message, and set it back down on the nightstand with a definitive click. "They think they can use the media to bully us into submission," he continued, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute chilling certainty. But all they did was hand the federal prosecution undeniable recorded proof of witness tampering, extortion, and obstruction of justice. "Watch this." Nathaniel did not pick up his phone to call in a favor. He did not abuse his position on the federal bench to silence my parents. Nor did he use his judicial authority to enact some petty personal revenge. He simply sat down beside me on the bed, opened his encrypted laptop, and asked me to pull up the financial tracing software I had been utilizing for the past 8 months. For the next 4 hours, we worked in absolute synchronized harmony. I provided the forensic data, meticulously tracking the exact routing numbers from Sabrina's cartel-funded shell companies directly into my parents' personal checking accounts. Nathaniel structured the legal framework, ensuring every single piece of evidence was impeccably formatted for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. We mapped out precisely how my parents had willfully accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit laundered funds to pay for their luxury cars, their mortgage arrears, and their exorbitant country club membership dues. By midnight, a comprehensive airtight evidence packet was securely transmitted to the lead investigators at the IRS. We did not need to fabricate a single document. My parents had built their own gilded cage entirely out of dirty money, and we had just handed the federal government the key to lock them inside it. 2 days later, Richard and Patricia decided to double down on their public relations disaster. They hosted a lavish Justice for Sabrina fundraiser at the Oakwood Country Club, the exact same venue where Sabrina had violently assaulted me. They invited local politicians, affluent business owners, and prominent socialites, charging a premium for a catered luncheon to raise money for Sabrina's federal defense fund. They stood on a small elevated stage in the grand ballroom, holding champagne flutes, painting themselves as righteous victims of a tyrannical, corrupt justice system. They were exactly halfway through their tearful, manipulative speech when the heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. It was not the local police this time. It was a highly coordinated team of federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets prominently emblazoned with the letters IRSCID. They marched straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, completely bypassing the terrified waitstaff and the gasping country club elite. The lead agent stepped firmly up to the podium, interrupting my father mid-sentence. He did not ask for permission. He handed Richard a thick stack of heavy legal documents. "These are civil asset forfeiture notices. The agent announced, his voice carrying easily through the microphone my father was still holding in his trembling hand. Your personal bank accounts, your investment portfolios, and your membership shares at this club have been officially frozen by the United States government. You are currently in possession of assets purchased with proceeds from an international money laundering syndicate. Absolute panic erupted in the elegant ballroom. Wealthy donors scrambled toward the exits, shielding their faces from camera phones, desperate to distance themselves from a highly publicized federal raid. Patricia dropped her champagne flute, the crystal shattering loudly against the polished wood floor. She rushed out of the ballroom and into the valet parking lot, followed closely by a trailing group of federal agents and curious onlookers. Two heavy-duty tow trucks were already parked in the circular driveway. Patricia watched in absolute horror as operators strapped heavy metal chains around her pristine pearl-white Mercedes-Benz and Richard's imported sports car. The luxury vehicles my parents had proudly paraded around town for years, purchased entirely with Sabrina's dirty cartel cash, were hoisted into the air and impounded as federal evidence right in front of their social circle. My phone rang exactly 1 hour later. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping a cup of warm herbal tea, watching the live local news coverage of the country club raid on my tablet. I answered the call and put it on speaker so Nathaniel could hear. "Gwendolyn!" Patricia screamed into the receiver, her voice a hysterical, unintelligible shriek. Her carefully crafted media persona had completely evaporated under the crushing weight of federal consequences. They took the cars. They froze the accounts. My credit cards are declining everywhere. You vindictive evil girl. You are taking everything from us. I took a slow, calming sip of my tea, feeling the warmth settle deep in my chest. I looked across the kitchen island at Nathaniel, who leaned against the marble counter and gave me a single approving nod. I leaned closer to the phone, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy or hesitation. "I am not taking anything from you, Mom," I replied coldly. "The federal government is just repossessing stolen property. But you should probably check your calendar. Because the shadow syndicate you borrowed $500,000 from to bail out Sabrina last week, they are the ones taking the rest. You missed your first payment this morning." After hanging up the phone on my mother, I set the device face down on the marble kitchen island. Nathaniel wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his hands gently over my pregnant belly. The house was quiet, but we both knew a massive storm was rapidly approaching our doorstep. When you borrow $500,000 from a shadow syndicate operating out of a strip mall, missing a payment is not met with a polite collection letter. It is met with broken glass and violent threats. It took less than 48 hours for reality to catch up with Richard and Patricia. It was just past 9 in the evening when the frantic, desperate pounding began at our solid oak front door. Nathaniel instantly moved in front of me, his hand resting near his hip, signaling his judicial security details stationed outside to hold their position but remain on high alert. We walked to the foyer together. I checked the security camera monitor mounted on the wall. Standing on our front porch, illuminated by the harsh glare of the motion sensor lights, were my parents. They looked absolutely unrecognizable. The arrogant country club facade they had worn like armor for decades had completely vanished. Patricia was not wearing her signature pearls or her expensive cashmere cardigan. She was wearing a mismatched tracksuit, her hair disheveled, her face devoid of makeup, and pale with sheer terror. Richard looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 days. He kept looking over his shoulder into the dark street, his hands trembling violently. I opened the heavy door, but I kept my hand firmly on the brass handle, blocking the entrance completely. "Gwendolyn, thank God." Patricia sobbed, reaching out to grab my arm. "Please, you have to let us in." They came to the house. The men from the loan company. They threw a brick through the living room window and said if we do not have the cash by tomorrow, they are going to take it out of our hides. "We have nowhere else to go. You have to hide us." I looked at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel small, invisible, and utterly worthless. The same people who had stood in a hospital room just weeks earlier, screaming that they would disown me for daring to press charges against the golden child who violently kicked my unborn baby. I did not move an inch. "I am sorry," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of warmth. But you are not coming inside my home. Richard gasped, his eyes wide with shock. You cannot do this, he stammered, his voice cracking with fear. We are your parents. We are in physical danger. The government froze our accounts. We do not have a single dime to our names. Family protects family. You owe us sanctuary. I owe you absolutely nothing. I fired back, my tone sharpening into a weapon. Where was this desperate need for family protection when you kicked me out 5 years ago because I refused to take out fraudulent credit cards to fund Sabrina's fake business? Where was your parental loyalty when you stood over my hospital bed defending the woman who nearly killed your grandchild? You forged the signature of a good, honest man to borrow dirty money from a violent cartel just to bail out a criminal. You enabled Sabrina's toxic behavior for 30 years, throwing me under the bus at every single turn so she could play pretend on the internet. And now that the bill has come due, you want to use my home as a shield. Patricia fell to her knees on the cold concrete porch, weeping uncontrollably. We made a mistake, Gwendolyn. We were foolish. We will do whatever you want. Just please do not let them kill us. Before I could respond, the sound of heavy tires rolling up our long paved driveway cut through the night air. Patricia screamed, scrambling behind Richard. Both of them cowered against the brick facade of our porch, convinced the mobsters had finally tracked them down. Two large black SUVs with heavily tinted windows pulled up their headlights, blinding in the dark. But it was not the cartel stepping out of the vehicles. The heavy doors swung open and 4 federal agents wearing dark suits and earpieces stepped onto the driveway, establishing a tight security perimeter. From the back seat of the second SUV stepped Donovan. He looked exhausted but resolute, flanked tightly by his FBI escort. My brother-in-law had officially entered protective custody after turning over all of Sabrina's digital ledgers. He walked up the pathway toward the porch, his eyes locking onto Richard and Patricia with an icy, unforgiving glare. Donovan did not yell. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded legal document. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and held the paper out toward my father. What is this? Richard asked, his voice shaking so badly he could barely form the words. Have you come to help us, Donovan? Donovan let out a humorless, dry chuckle. I came to deliver a message, he said coldly. This is an official notice of eviction. My parents stared at him, utterly bewildered. Eviction! Patricia cried out. You cannot evict us from our own house. We have lived there for 20 years. I stepped past Nathaniel, standing tall on the top step, looking down at the people who had tormented me for decades. You do not own that house anymore, Mom, I explained, delivering the final crushing blow. As I reminded you in the hospital, I am the primary equity holder on that deed because I bailed you out of your last bankruptcy. And since you used that property address to illegally secure funds from a transnational crime syndicate, the asset became hopelessly compromised. So I took the liberty of resolving the issue for you. I just legally transferred the deed and full ownership of your house to the United States government. The FBI is using it as a sting operation property starting tonight to trap the shadow lenders you owe money to. You have nowhere to go back to. My parents backed away from my porch, their faces twisted in a mixture of horror and absolute defeat. They stumbled down the driveway, completely ignoring Donovan, who watched them with an expression of cold disgust. The federal agents immediately moved in, securing the perimeter of the property and beginning their sting operation setup. Richard and Patricia had no choice but to walk out into the dark street, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs, realizing that their entire empire of lies had finally collapsed into dust. I closed my heavy oak front door, locked the deadbolt, and turned back to Nathaniel. We had secured our safety for the night, but we both knew my sister was not the type of person to accept defeat gracefully. Miles away inside the cold concrete walls of the federal detention center, Sabrina was pacing the length of her small holding cell. She was no longer wearing her tailored designer suits. She was dressed in a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, her expensive blowout replaced by a messy knot at the back of her head. Yet despite her surroundings, Sabrina remained completely enveloped in her own arrogance. She honestly believed she was the smartest person in the room, convinced that my forensic accounting was nothing more than a lucky guess she could easily outmaneuver. She walked over to the corner of her cell, reaching into a small gap behind the metal toilet fixture. She pulled out a cheap plastic burner phone. She had secured the device earlier that afternoon by promising a corrupt night shift guard $50,000 the moment she posted bail. Sabrina powered on the device, checking the signal strength. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call her parents. She dialed a heavily encrypted voice-over internet protocol number connected to a sleazy offshore financial fixer she kept on retainer. The call connected after 3 rings. Sabrina kept her voice to a harsh, demanding whisper. "It is me," she said, pacing back to the cell door to watch for the guards. The feds raided the boutique and froze the domestic accounts. "I need you to initiate Protocol Epsilon. Move the $2 million rainy day fund from the Cayman Islands Shell Company directly to the holding account in Dubai. I am getting out of here, and I need that cash ready for immediate extraction." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. The accountant cleared his throat, his tone laced with professional hesitation. "I can initiate the wire transfer, Sabrina, but you know the security protocols we established. I cannot authorize the final release of funds to the Dubai routing number without the master encryption key. It is a 2-factor authentication process designed specifically to prevent federal asset seizure. I need the hardware token." Sabrina gritted her teeth, her manicured nails digging into her palms. "I know the protocol," she snapped. "The physical hard drive with the encryption key is still at the boutique. The FBI missed it during their initial raid because I hid it in a false bottom safe under the break room floorboards. I will get it to you by tomorrow morning. Just prep the offshore accounts and wait for the ping." She ended the call, her mind racing with desperate, calculated schemes. She needed someone on the outside, someone foolish enough and desperate enough to risk committing a federal crime for her. She dialed a new number, waiting as it rang. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice cracking with exhausted sobs. She and Richard were sitting in a cheap roadside motel room they had managed to rent, using the last few $100s they had in a hidden emergency cash stash. "Sabrina, oh my sweet girl," Patricia cried, gripping the cheap plastic phone receiver. "Gwendolyn took the house. She gave it to the government. We have nothing left. The cartel men are going to kill us." Sabrina rolled her eyes, completely devoid of empathy for her parents' current nightmare. "Stop crying, Mom, and listen to me very carefully," Sabrina ordered, her tone sharp and commanding. "Gwendolyn is a pathetic amateur playing dress-up with the Department of Justice. She thinks she seized everything, but she missed my primary offshore vault. I have $2 million waiting for us in Dubai. We can leave this country tomorrow. We can start over." Patricia gasped, a sudden, desperate wave of hope washing over her. $2 million. "How do we get it?" "I need you to do exactly what I say," Sabrina instructed, spelling out her plan with ruthless precision. "Drive to the boutique right now. The feds locked it down, but the back alley delivery door has a broken latch they do not know about. You can slip inside. Go to the employee break room. Under the small refrigerator there is a loose floorboard. Lift it up and you will find a small biometric safe. The passcode is my birthday. Inside is a black external hard drive. It contains the master encryption key for the Cayman accounts. Get that drive, Mom. Get it and we all fly to Dubai." Patricia did not hesitate. Driven by the sheer terror of the cartel and her blind devotion to her golden child, she agreed instantly. She left Richard sleeping fitfully in the motel room, borrowed their remaining rental car, and drove through the dead of night toward the upscale shopping district where Sabrina's boutique was located. The storefront was completely dark, the windows covered in thick yellow FBI evidence tape. Patricia parked a block away and crept down the dark garbage-strewn alley behind the building. Her heart pounded furiously against her ribs as she found the metal delivery door. Just as Sabrina had promised, the latch was broken. Patricia pulled the heavy door open and slipped inside the pitch-black boutique, breathing heavily as she navigated through the maze of boxed-up counterfeit inventory. She used the faint glow of her cell phone screen to find her way to the back break room. She dropped to her knees on the cold tile floor, her hands shaking violently as she pushed the heavy mini-fridge aside. She pried up the loose floorboard, letting out a sharp gasp of relief when she saw the small metal safe hidden in the concrete subfloor. Patricia rapidly punched in Sabrina's birthday. The safe beeped and the heavy metal door clicked open. She reached inside her fingers, wrapping around the smooth, cold plastic of the black external hard drive. She had done it. She had secured their ticket out of the country. She smiled in the dark, imagining the luxury of Dubai and the glorious defeat of her ungrateful oldest daughter. Suddenly, the harsh, blinding overhead fluorescent lights of the break room snapped on with a loud electrical buzz. Patricia shrieked, dropping her cell phone as she shielded her eyes from the sudden brightness. As her vision slowly adjusted to the harsh lighting, the blood completely drained from her face. She was not alone. Standing in a tight semicircle around the break room were 6 heavily armed federal agents, their tactical gear clearly displaying the FBI logo. And sitting directly in front of them, resting comfortably on a metal folding chair with her legs crossed and a serene, calculated smile on her face, was me. I looked at my mother, who was kneeling on the dirty floor, clutching the plastic hard drive to her chest like a lifeline. I held out my hand, palm up, my voice echoing coldly in the bright room. "Looking for this, Mom?" I asked, holding up the actual, genuine, encrypted hard drive. "I swapped out the fake one you were holding about 4 hours ago. Thank you for officially committing a federal break-in. We needed probable cause to arrest you as an accessory." My mother dropped the plastic hard drive onto the cold tile floor of the break room. The sharp clatter echoed as 2 federal agents moved forward, securing her wrists in zip ties. She did not fight them. She just stared at me with wide, terrified eyes as they read her Miranda rights, finally realizing that her blind devotion to Sabrina had just cost her the very last shred of her freedom. I did not stay to watch them load her into the transport vehicle. We had secured the actual encryption key, and with Patricia officially charged as an accessory to federal obstruction, our focus shifted entirely to the upcoming criminal trial. The wheels of federal justice grind exceedingly fine, and as the trial date loomed, Sabrina grew increasingly desperate. She was still sitting in a federal detention center, stripped of her counterfeit luxury and her enabling parents. Unable to manipulate anyone else from behind bars, she relied entirely on her sleazy, high-priced defense attorney, a man named Bradley Mitchell, who was notorious for playing dirty. 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin, I was summoned for a pre-trial deposition. The defense was trying a vile, completely unhinged tactic. Mitchell had filed a motion to subpoena my private medical records, attempting to build a narrative that Sabrina's violent kick to my stomach was nothing more than a minor accident. He wanted to prove that my baby was perfectly fine and that I was intentionally faking the trauma to retaliate against my sister out of petty, deep-seated jealousy. The deposition took place in a sterile, windowless conference room in downtown Chicago. I sat at a long mahogany table, my pregnant belly resting comfortably against the edge. Nathaniel sat directly beside me, not in his black judicial robes, but in a sharply tailored charcoal suit, acting as my personal legal advocate. Across from us sat Bradley Mitchell, a man who oozed arrogance, wearing a flashy watch purchased with the retainer fee Sabrina had undoubtedly paid, using cartel cash. Mitchell leaned back in his leather chair, tapping a gold pen against his legal pad. He looked at me with a condescending sneer, completely underestimating the woman sitting across from him. "Let us be honest here, Gwendolyn." Mitchell began, his tone dripping with patronizing faux sympathy. "You claim my client committed aggravated assault, but according to the emergency room admission reports, the fetal heartbeat was established within 20 minutes of your arrival. You suffered some bruising, yes, but no permanent damage. This was a minor family scuffle. You are weaponizing a bruised ego and a bruised hip to lock your sister away for 15 years. I stared at him, my expression perfectly blank. "My child stopped moving," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "I was bleeding on the floor of a country club. There is no such thing as a minor scuffle when you intentionally kick a pregnant woman in the stomach." Mitchell waved his hand dismissively. "Subjective," he said. "We have expert witnesses prepared to testify that the force used was insufficient to cause actual fetal demise. You blew it out of proportion because you have spent your entire life in your younger sister's shadow. She built a massive, highly visible fashion brand, while you sat in a gray cubicle crunching numbers as a glorified calculator. Is it not true that you simply saw an opportunity to use this accident to destroy her business? Because you could never build one yourself. Before I could utter a single word in response to his ridiculous claim, Nathaniel leaned forward. He did not raise his voice. He simply projected the kind of lethal, unyielding authority that made seasoned prosecutors tremble in his courtroom. "Mr. Mitchell." Nathaniel said, his voice cold and precise, attempting to downplay felony assault by arguing the victim was fortunate enough not to lose her child is a profoundly flawed legal strategy. Under the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, the intent to cause bodily harm to the mother which directly affects the child is sufficient for severe federal sentencing enhancements. Your client screamed a threat before delivering a targeted blow. That establishes malicious intent. And if you attempt to put a medical expert on the stand to argue that kicking a pregnant woman is a harmless mistake, the prosecution will decimate your expert on cross-examination. Mitchell scowled, clearly annoyed that his intimidation tactics were failing. I have every right to question the witness's state of mind and her professional background. Your Honor, he sneered deliberately, using Nathaniel's title to sound mocking. We are simply establishing that she lacks the sophisticated financial understanding required to accurately accuse my client of international money laundering. She is a low-level tax employee who got in over her head. Nathaniel did not even blink. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the polished wood table. That is a copy of Gwendolyn's unclassified service record, Nathaniel stated calmly. You will note that she does not just crunch numbers. She holds a master's degree in forensic accounting, is a certified fraud examiner, and has served as the lead financial analyst on 3 separate joint task forces with the FBI. Under Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals, her expertise is not only relevant, it is unimpeachable. Furthermore, if you continue to badger my wife with defamatory statements regarding her career during this deposition, I will personally file a motion for sanctions against you under Rule 11 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure for pursuing frivolous and harassing lines of questioning. Mitchell stared at the document, the smugness rapidly draining from his face. He realized in that exact moment that he was not bullying a timid tax clerk. He was going toe-to-toe with a highly decorated federal investigator and a sitting federal judge who knew the law intimately. He cleared his throat desperately, trying to pivot and regain control of the deposition. Fine, Mitchell muttered, tossing the paper aside. Let us talk about the so-called money laundering. You claim my client was washing cartel funds through shell companies, but my financial experts have reviewed the initial discovery files. We have substantial, undeniable proof that Sabrina's offshore accounts were completely legitimate. Mitchell leaned forward, attempting to look intimidating, as he delivered what he believed was his winning blow. Those accounts in the Cayman Islands were tied to standard overseas manufacturing vendors. It was clean money legally earned through her boutique. We have the digital ledgers to prove it. You have nothing but circumstantial evidence, Gwendolyn. I felt a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the exact smile of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into a trap. I rested my hands on my pregnant belly and looked Bradley Mitchell dead in the eyes. I was hoping you would say that. I replied, my voice dripping with icy satisfaction. Please, Mr. Mitchell, submit those accounts and those digital ledgers into evidence tomorrow. I insist. The heavy mahogany doors of the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago swung open 2 weeks later, marking the beginning of the criminal trial that would permanently dismantle my sister's life. I sat in the second row of the gallery, my 8-month pregnant belly making it difficult to find a comfortable position on the hard wooden benches. Nathaniel was not acting as my legal advocate today. He sat beside me in the gallery, as a supportive husband, his presence alone commanding respect from the federal marshals guarding the room. At the defense table sat Sabrina. She had traded her Orange County Jail jumpsuit for a tailored pale pink designer suit. Her hair was professionally styled, and she wore a soft, practiced expression of wide-eyed innocence. She looked over her shoulder, caught my eye, and offered a smug, superior little smile. She actually believed she was going to win. She believed her high-priced lawyer Bradley Mitchell had successfully laid a trap for me with the offshore accounts. The trial commenced with opening statements. The federal prosecutor, a sharp and methodical woman, laid out the facts of the case with clinical precision. She detailed the money laundering, the wire fraud, the forged loans, and the brutal assault on a federal employee. But when it was Bradley Mitchell's turn to address the jury, the defense strategy became blindingly clear. Mitchell paced in front of the jury box, utilizing every theatrical trick in his arsenal. He painted Sabrina as a naive, hard-working boutique owner who had simply trusted the wrong overseas manufacturers. He claimed she was a young entrepreneur who had been manipulated by shadowy foreign entities she knew nothing about. Then Mitchell turned his sights on me. He gestured toward where I sat in the gallery, spinning a fabricated tale of deep-seated sibling rivalry. He told the jury that I was a hormonal, deeply jealous older sister who had spent my entire life living in the shadow of Sabrina's vibrant success. He argued that I had weaponized my low-level government clearance to launch a personal vendetta, orchestrating a fake federal probe to destroy the fashion empire I could never build myself. It was a disgusting, completely unhinged narrative, but Sabrina sat at the defense table nodding along with tears glistening perfectly in her eyes, playing the victim with absolute conviction. I felt the baby kick strongly against my ribs, a comforting reminder of what I was fighting for. I simply took a slow breath and waited. I knew their entire defense was built on a foundation of sand and the tide was about to rush in. The prosecution called their first major witness. The heavy wooden side door opened and Donovan walked into the courtroom. My brother-in-law looked entirely different from the broken man who had thrown his wedding ring on the hospital floor. He wore a sharp, dark suit, his posture straight, his expression an impenetrable mask of calm resolve. He walked to the witness stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the absolute truth. Under the direct examination of the federal prosecutor, Donovan's testimony was flawless. He did not let emotion cloud his delivery. He spoke with the meticulous, structured precision of the brilliant architect he was. He walked the jury step by step through the exact moment he discovered his signature had been forged on the loan documents securing $500,000 from a shadow syndicate. He detailed how he had dedicated his life to a nonprofit organization building mortgage-free homes for disabled veterans, and how he had uncovered the devastating truth that his wife had used his charity's bank accounts to wash dirty cash from international cartels. The jury listened in rapt attention. Donovan's quiet dignity and undeniable heartbreak made him an incredibly compelling witness. You could practically feel the air being sucked out of the defense's strategy. But Bradley Mitchell was not going to let the testimony stand without a fight. During cross-examination, Mitchell aggressively approached the podium, his voice dripping with condescension. He attempted to tear Donovan's character to shreds. He brought up the emergency divorce filings, trying to paint Donovan as an angry, bitter ex-husband who was simply seeking a massive financial payout. Mitchell insinuated that Donovan's architectural firm was secretly failing, and that Donovan had willingly participated in the financial irregularities, only turning on Sabrina to save his own skin when the federal government got involved. You expect this jury to believe you had absolutely no idea millions of dollars were moving through your own charity, Mitchell sneered, leaning heavily against the wooden barrier of the witness stand. You are a smart man, Donovan. You are just trying to secure a favorable divorce settlement by throwing your successful wife to the wolves because you could not handle being the lesser earner in the marriage. Donovan did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or take the bait. He looked directly at Bradley Mitchell with a chilling, absolute calmness. I did not know about the money because my wife deliberately hid the secondary ledgers, Donovan replied smoothly. But I did start asking questions about the charity's tax filings a few weeks before her arrest. She did not like those questions. The federal prosecutor stood up and addressed the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution requests permission to enter Exhibit 42 into evidence. It is an audio recording extracted from the witness's personal voicemail previously submitted during discovery. The judge nodded, granting permission. Bradley Mitchell's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. Sabrina suddenly sat perfectly still at the defense table, the manufactured tears drying instantly on her cheeks. The prosecutor pressed a button on her laptop. The audio played through the courtroom speakers crisp and devastatingly clear. It was a recording of a voicemail Sabrina had left Donovan after one of their arguments regarding the charity's financial audits. Sabrina's voice echoed through the silent courtroom, completely devoid of the sweet, innocent persona she had been projecting all morning. Her voice was shrill, arrogant, and dripping with venom. "Stop asking me about the foundation accounts!" Donovan Sabrina's recorded voice shrieked, the anger vibrating through the speakers. "I am the one bringing in the real money. I do not care about your stupid veterans. They are just a convenient tax write-off for my real clients. If you keep digging into my ledgers, I will ruin your little architectural firm." A collective audible gasp rippled through the jury box. Several jurors physically recoiled, their faces contorting with absolute disgust. The narrative of the naive, innocent boutique owner shattered into a million irreparable pieces in a matter of seconds. Bradley Mitchell stood frozen at the podium, his mouth slightly open, completely unable to spin the horrific reality of his client's own words. At the defense table, Sabrina's face drained of all color, her meticulously applied makeup standing out starkly against her suddenly ashen skin. She looked frantically toward my parents, sitting in the row behind me, but Richard and Patricia were staring at the floor in horrified silence. I rested my hand on my stomach, feeling a profound sense of vindication wash over me. The trap was set, the defense was crumbling, and the real devastation was only just beginning. The echo of Sabrina's venomous recorded voice finally faded, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the federal courtroom. Sabrina remained frozen at the defense table, her perfectly manicured hands trembling against the polished wood. Her defense attorney, Bradley Mitchell, stared blankly at his legal pad, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic collapse of his case. The federal prosecutor did not give them a single moment to recover. She stood tall at her podium, adjusting her glasses with clinical precision. "The prosecution calls our next witness," the prosecutor announced, her voice ringing clear across the room. "We call Richard to the stand." My father stiffened in the row directly behind me. He had been compelled to appear today under a strict federal subpoena. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive custom-tailored suit, a garment purchased entirely with laundered cartel money. He stood up, jutting his chin out in a desperate attempt to project his usual country club arrogance, and marched down the center aisle toward the witness box. I sat back against the hard wooden bench, resting my hand on my 8-month pregnant belly. Nathaniel sat beside me, his shoulder a solid, comforting presence against mine. We both knew exactly what was about to happen. We had spent hours reviewing the forensic evidence I had gathered, anticipating every lie my father might try to tell. Richard raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and took his seat. The federal prosecutor approached the witness stand holding a single thin manila folder. "Sir," the prosecutor began, her tone measured and polite. "Are you aware of the financial structure of your daughter, Sabrina's luxury boutique? And did you ever knowingly receive funds derived from her illicit overseas operations?" Instead of answering the question directly, my father gripped the edges of the witness stand and launched into a premeditated, highly rehearsed tirade. He decided to gamble his entire freedom on destroying my character, firmly believing that his word as a wealthy suburban patriarch would outweigh federal evidence. "My daughter Sabrina is an innocent victim in all of this," Richard declared loudly, turning his head to make direct eye contact with the jury box. "The only reason we are sitting in this courtroom today is because of my oldest daughter, Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn has always been deeply mentally unstable. She has suffered from pathological hysterical jealousy since she was a child. She fabricated this entire ridiculous money laundering story. She manipulated her position as a low-level tax employee to launch a fake federal probe simply because she could never stand seeing her younger sister succeed. Sabrina is a legitimate business owner, and our family finances are completely, undeniably clean." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. In the row behind me, my mother Patricia nodded fervently, whispering her agreement to anyone sitting close enough to hear. At the defense table, Sabrina sat up a little straighter, a flicker of desperate hope returning to her eyes. The prosecutor did not interrupt his defamatory rant. She stood silently, allowing my father to dig his own grave on the federal record. When he finally finished speaking, the prosecutor tilted her head, her expression entirely devoid of sympathy. So you are stating under oath, under penalty of perjury, that you had absolutely no knowledge of any money laundering and that you never requested or received illicit funds from Sabrina's businesses? The prosecutor asked, giving him one final chance to reconsider his lies. I am stating exactly that, Richard replied, puffing out his chest with unearned confidence. It is a fabricated witch hunt. The prosecutor turned toward the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution requests permission to enter Exhibit 89 into evidence. These are encrypted text messages extracted directly from Sabrina's personal mobile device, voluntarily surrendered to the FBI by her husband Donovan. The presiding judge nodded, and the prosecutor handed a printed transcript to the bailiff, who passed it to my father. Bradley Mitchell leaped out of his chair, objecting frantically, but the judge ordered him to sit down. Please read the highlighted message dated October 14th of last year. The prosecutor instructed, pointing at the document in my father's trembling hands. The message you sent to Sabrina just 2 days after the bank threatened to foreclose on your mortgage. Richard stared at this paper. The color drained from his face so rapidly he looked as though he might physically collapse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. If you will not read it, Sir, I will read it for the jury, the prosecutor said coldly. She picked up her own copy of the transcript and turned to face the jury box. The text message from the witness to the defendant reads as follows. The mortgage company is calling again, and Patricia is panicking about the country club dues. I know the inventory shipment just came in. We need a cut of the clean cash by Friday. Make sure you route it through the usual channels, so the IRS does not ask any questions. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and shocked whispers. The jury stared at my father with expressions of absolute, unfiltered disgust. The prosecutor stepped closer to the witness stand, her voice cutting through the noise like a whip. A cut of the clean cash, she repeated deliberately. You knew exactly where that money was coming from, and you actively directed your daughter on how to hide it from the federal government. Furthermore, financial records confirm a deposit of exactly $40,000 into your personal checking account precisely 48 hours after you sent that text. My father was sweating profusely, his hands shaking so violently the paper fluttered against the wooden railing. That was a joke, he stammered, his voice pitching up in a pathetic, desperate squeak. It was taken entirely out of context. You are twisting my words. You do not get to claim context when you are caught committing federal tax evasion and racketeering, the prosecutor fired back. You just sat in a federal courtroom, swore an oath to God, and brazenly lied to a jury to protect a criminal enterprise. The presiding judge slammed his gavel down hard, the sharp crack silencing the room instantly. The judge glared down at my father with an expression of pure judicial fury. Sir, you have just committed blatant perjury in my courtroom, the judge declared, his voice echoing with finality. Before my father could even attempt to offer another miserable excuse, the judge looked directly at the United States Marshals standing at the perimeter of the room. Take the witness into custody immediately, the judge ordered. 2 heavily armed marshals marched down the center aisle, grabbed my father by his expensive suit jacket, and hauled him forcefully out of the witness box. Richard let out a humiliating, terrified yelp as they pulled his arms behind his back and secured the steel handcuffs around his wrists. From the gallery behind me, Patricia let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. You cannot do this to him, she shrieked, leaping to her feet and climbing over the wooden benches. We are respected members of this community. My husband is an innocent man. You are destroying our family. The judge slammed his gavel again. Bailiffs, remove that woman from my courtroom right now. 2 court officers grabbed Patricia by the arms, dragging her thrashing and screaming down the center aisle. She kicked her designer heels against the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the heavy oak doors were pushed open and she was forcibly ejected into the public hallway. I sat perfectly still, watching the chaotic scene unfold with absolute chilling satisfaction. I looked toward the defense table. Sabrina was sitting completely frozen in her chair. She was not crying. She was not smirking. She was staring at the empty witness stand, her chest heaving with rapid, panicked breaths. She watched her father get dragged away in handcuffs, and she heard the muffled, desperate screams of her mother echoing from the hallway. In that singular, devastating moment, the reality of her situation finally crashed down upon her. The bulletproof shield of her parents' wealth and arrogance had just been shattered into a million pieces. She had absolutely no one left to protect her, and she was entirely at my mercy. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom had barely closed behind my screaming mother when the presiding judge struck his gavel again, demanding absolute order. The gallery was still buzzing with the shock of my father being hauled away in handcuffs for blatant perjury. At the defense table, Sabrina sat completely paralyzed, her carefully crafted facade of innocence shattered into pieces. She stared at the empty witness stand, her chest heaving with panicked breaths. She had just watched her final line of defense collapse, leaving her entirely exposed to the full weight of the federal justice system. The federal prosecutor stepped back up to the podium, her posture straight and her expression entirely focused. "The prosecution calls our final expert witness," the prosecutor announced, her voice echoing clearly through the cavernous room. "We call senior forensic accountant Gwendolyn Hayes to the stand." I stood up from the hard wooden bench in the gallery. At 8 months pregnant, my center of gravity had completely shifted, but I did not let the physical discomfort show. Nathaniel stood with me, placing a warm, steadying hand on my lower back. I looked at my husband, drawing strength from his quiet, absolute confidence. And then I began the slow, deliberate walk down the center aisle. Every eye in the courtroom tracked my movement. I walked past the gallery, past the prosecution table, and stepped up into the witness box. I raised my right hand, swore the oath to tell the absolute truth, and took my seat. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," the prosecutor began. "My name is Gwendolyn Hayes," I replied, my voice projecting clearly into the microphone. "I am a certified fraud examiner and a senior forensic accountant for the United States Department of Justice Financial Crimes Task Force." The prosecutor nodded. "Mrs. Hayes, can you please explain to the jury exactly how the defendant utilized her luxury fashion boutique to launder illicit funds?" I turned my attention directly to the jury box. I did not use confusing federal acronyms or overly complex financial jargon. I spoke to them with the clear, methodical precision of someone who had spent 8 months tracking every single dime of dirty money. With the judge's permission, a large whiteboard was wheeled to the center of the room. I stood up, walked over to the board, and picked up a black marker. "Money laundering requires 3 distinct steps," I explained, drawing a simple diagram on the board: placement, layering, and integration. Sabrina used a very specific method known as trade-based money laundering, combined with cash structuring to avoid detection. She would purchase extremely cheap counterfeit luxury goods from overseas manufacturers for pennies on the dollar. However, she would falsify her domestic sales records, claiming she sold these cheap items for thousands of dollars to anonymous cash buyers. I drew a line connecting a fake buyer to the boutique, then drew another line to a bank building. "Those anonymous cash buyers did not exist," I continued. "The cash being deposited into the boutique's business accounts was actually drug money provided by a transnational syndicate. By creating fake sales receipts, Sabrina made the dirty cash look like legitimate retail profit. Furthermore, she structured her bank deposits, keeping every single cash drop under $10,000 to deliberately evade the mandatory currency transaction reports required by the IRS. She then took that clean money and funneled it through her husband's veteran housing charity to avoid paying corporate taxes, ultimately transferring the untaxed laundered funds into offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands." The jury members were taking frantic notes, completely captivated by the undeniable mathematical proof of Sabrina's criminal enterprise. I returned to the witness stand, leaving the devastating diagram on display for everyone to see. The prosecution concluded their direct examination, leaving the floor open for the defense. Bradley Mitchell practically sprinted to the podium. His case was in absolute ruins, and his only remaining strategy was a desperate, vicious character assassination. He adjusted his expensive tie, aiming a look of pure contempt at me. Let us talk about your real motivation here today, Gwendolyn. Mitchell sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. You just gave a very impressive presentation. But is it not true that you have spent your entire life harboring a deep, bitter inferiority complex regarding your younger sister? Objection, the prosecutor called out immediately. Relevance. Goes to witness bias and credibility, Your Honor, Mitchell argued frantically. The jury deserves to know the malicious intent behind this investigation. I will allow it, the judge ruled, looking at me carefully. But tread lightly, counselor. Mitchell turned back to me with a triumphant smirk. Your sister was a beautiful, successful entrepreneur who ran with high society. He continued, pacing in front of the jury box. You were the forgotten older sibling sitting in a boring government cubicle, wearing cheap suits and taking orders. You orchestrated this entire federal witch hunt because you were drowning in jealousy. You manipulated your parents, you destroyed her marriage, and you finally found a way to use your government badge to steal her spotlight. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or take his emotional bait. I simply looked at him with icy, predatory calmness. I do not wear cheap suits, Mr. Mitchell, I replied evenly. And I do not need to steal a spotlight that was purchased with cartel blood money. My motivation is mathematics. Numbers do not feel jealousy. Numbers do not have an inferiority complex. The financial ledgers clearly show that your client moved $5 million of illicit funds across international borders. My personal feelings about my sister are entirely irrelevant to the fact that she committed federal racketeering. Mitchell gritted his teeth, his face flushing red as the jury visibly reacted to my unshakable composure. He slammed his hand against the wooden podium. You talk about offshore shell companies and international borders, Mitchell barked, trying to regain his footing. But you have absolutely zero direct evidence connecting my client to those overseas accounts. You have no proof she actually controlled the Cayman Islands' assets. It is all circumstantial speculation based on fabricated federal algorithms. I felt a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the exact moment I had been waiting for since Sabrina made that desperate phone call from her holding cell. I reached into the breast pocket of my maternity blazer and pulled out a single neatly folded document stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice. Oh, I do have proof, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register that forced the entire courtroom to lean in and listen. Because I tracked her moving the $2 million last night. The tense atmosphere inside the federal courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. The trial of my sister Sabrina had reached its absolute climax. The prosecution had systematically dismantled her carefully constructed defense, piece by piece, exposing the massive international money laundering syndicate she had run right out of her luxury fashion boutique. She had forged her own husband's signature, hijacked his charity for disabled veterans, and funneled millions of dollars in illicit cartel funds through offshore shell companies. And I was the one who had finally caught her. I sat in the witness box, my 8-month pregnant belly a constant reassuring reminder of the family I was protecting. The defense attorney, Bradley Mitchell, had just spent the last 20 minutes aggressively trying to discredit me. He had mocked my accounting career, accused me of bitter, lifelong jealousy, and finally desperately claimed that he had undeniable proof Sabrina's offshore accounts were completely legitimate. He had sneered at me, demanding to know how a low-level tax clerk could possibly prove that his client actually controlled those overseas assets. He thought he had backed me into a corner. He thought his fabricated ledgers would save her. Instead, I had smiled. I reached into the breast pocket of my maternity blazer and pulled out a single neatly folded document stamped with the official seal of the United States Department of Justice. Oh, I do have proof, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, quiet register that forced the entire courtroom to lean in and listen. Because I tracked her moving the $2 million last night. Bradley Mitchell froze, his hand suspended over his legal pad. At the defense table, Sabrina's smug, superior expression vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The federal prosecutor stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Mrs. Hayes, she said, her voice ringing clearly across the room, can you please explain to the jury exactly what happened last night regarding the defendant's offshore accounts? I turned my attention directly to the jury box. I spoke slowly and deliberately, ensuring every single word carried the devastating weight of federal authority. While sitting in a federal detention center, I began. The defendant bribed a corrupt guard to obtain a contraband burner phone. She used that phone to contact an anonymous dark web accountant. She instructed this accountant to immediately wire $2 million from her hidden shell company in the Cayman Islands directly to a holding account in Dubai. Her plan was to stash the cash overseas so she could flee the country the moment she managed to post bail. Bradley Mitchell began stammering, frantically flipping through his files. Objection. Your Honor, this is completely unsubstantiated. There is no proof my client authorized any such transfer. The judge slammed his gavel. Overruled. The witness will continue. I looked directly at Sabrina, who was now gripping the edge of the defense table so tightly her knuckles were white. She thought she was brilliant. I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. She thought she could outsmart the entire federal government by using encrypted networks and untraceable digital aliases. But she made one catastrophic mistake. I held up the DOJ document, the crisp white paper catching the light. The dark web accountant she hired to move that $2 million was not a criminal fixer. I revealed, savoring the absolute shock rippling through the courtroom. It was an undercover FBI alias that I personally created and maintained. Sabrina gasped loudly, her hand flying to her mouth. When she provided the master encryption key last night, I explained. Keeping my gaze locked on my sister, she authorized a massive international wire transfer. But the routing number she approved did not go to a bank in Dubai. It went directly into the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund. The courtroom erupted in a collective stunned murmur. The jury members stared at Sabrina with expressions of absolute astonishment. By pressing send, I concluded, my voice rising above the noise. Sabrina voluntarily relinquished 100% of her illicit offshore assets directly to the United States government. She handed over every single dime of her cartel blood money to the very agency prosecuting her. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening perfection. Then Sabrina completely snapped. She let out a blood-curdling, hysterical shriek that echoed off the high vaulted ceilings of the courtroom. "You set me up!" she screamed, leaping out of her chair. "You stole my money! You psychotic, jealous bitch!" She lunged forward, physically throwing herself over the defense table, her arms outstretched like claws as she scrambled desperately toward the witness box. She did not care that she was in a federal courtroom. She did not care that the jury was watching her every move. She was completely consumed by the realization that her entire empire of dirty money had just vanished into thin air. Before she could even make it halfway down the aisle, 3 heavily armed federal bailiffs tackled her to the polished wood floor. She thrashed violently against them, kicking and screaming obscenities as they pinned her arms behind her back and secured the steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. "Let me go!" she shrieked, her face pressed against the floor, her carefully styled hair falling into a messy, tangled halo around her face. She looked up at me, her eyes burning with pure, unhinged hatred. "I will kill you. I will ruin you. That money is mine." I sat perfectly still in the witness box, completely unfazed by her pathetic, violent outburst. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the woman who had spent my entire life trying to destroy me. "I did not steal it, Sabrina," I said calmly, my voice projecting clearly over her frantic screaming. "I audited it." My words hung in the sterile air of the federal courtroom, completely paralyzing the defense table. Sabrina stared at me with her mouth hanging open as the reality of her lost millions finally sank in. She had just confessed to attempting to move illicit funds out of the country, confirming every single piece of evidence I had meticulously presented to the jury. Bradley Mitchell, her incredibly expensive defense attorney, slowly sank back into his leather chair, running a trembling hand over his face. He knew his case was dead. He did not ask a single follow-up question. He simply stated that the defense had no further questions for the witness. I stepped down from the witness box, feeling a profound sense of closure as I walked back to the gallery, and took my seat next to Nathaniel. The federal prosecutor rested her case. Bradley Mitchell was so utterly defeated by the forensic evidence that he declined to call any additional witnesses. The closing arguments were swift and brutal. The prosecution painted a vivid, undeniable picture of a greedy, violent woman who used a charity for disabled veterans to wash cartel money and physically assaulted her pregnant sister to protect her lies. Mitchell attempted to deliver a closing statement about family misunderstandings, but he could barely look the jury in the eye. The presiding judge gave the jury their final instructions, and they filed out of the courtroom to begin their deliberations. Financial crimes involving international wire fraud, tax evasion, and complex shell companies usually take juries days to unravel. I sat on the hard wooden bench in the hallway, leaning my head against Nathaniel's shoulder, fully preparing myself for a long and exhausting wait. My baby kicked gently against my ribs, a soft flutter that brought a tired but genuine smile to my face. We did not have to wait long. Less than 2 hours later, the heavy courtroom doors swung open, and the bailiff announced that the jury had already reached a verdict. A collective wave of shock rippled through the gallery as everyone rushed back to their seats. 2 hours was a devastatingly short deliberation time. It meant there was absolutely no debate among the 12 men and women in the jury box. My forensic accounting had made the mathematics of Sabrina's crimes completely impossible to misunderstand. Sabrina stood at the defense table as the jury filed back into the room. She was trembling violently, her tailored pink designer suit looking suddenly far too large for her shrinking frame. She reached out to grab her lawyer's sleeve, but he kept his eyes fixed strictly on the judge. The foreperson of the jury stood up holding a stack of papers. The entire room held its breath as the judge asked if they had reached a verdict. The foreperson replied that they had. On count 1 wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Sabrina let out a sharp, breathless gasp. On count 2 tax evasion, we find the defendant guilty. On count 3 money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. The foreperson continued reading down the extensive list, and with every single guilty pronounced, the remaining color drained from Sabrina's face. She swayed on her feet, looking wildly toward our parents sitting in the row behind me. Richard and Patricia sat frozen in horrified silence, watching the golden child they had worshipped for 30 years be officially branded a federal criminal. On count 18, aggravated assault on a pregnant woman, we find the defendant guilty. Sabrina collapsed back into her wooden chair, burying her face in her hands, as loud, uncontrollable sobs racked her body. The judge slammed his gavel, accepting the verdict on all 18 counts. Because Sabrina had already demonstrated a severe flight risk and a history of violent behavior, the judge opted to move directly to the sentencing phase, refusing to allow her to return to a holding cell to await a later date. Sabrina realized in that exact moment that her life as she knew it was completely over. She stood up, tears streaming down her face, abandoning all her pride and arrogance. She looked up at the judge, clasping her hands together in a desperate, pathetic display of begging. "Please, Your Honor," Sabrina cried, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent courtroom. "Please have mercy on me. I am just a boutique owner. I made a few bad choices because I was stressed. I cannot go to federal prison. I will not survive behind bars. Please look at my family. We are good people. I promise I will pay everything back. Just give me another chance." She pointed a trembling finger toward me, hoping to use our blood relation as a final shield. "She is my sister. We can work this out privately. I do not deserve to lose my entire life over a misunderstanding." The presiding judge looked down at her from the high bench, his expression entirely unmoved by her theatrical weeping. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes cold and devoid of any sympathy. "You did not make a few bad choices," the judge stated, his authoritative voice cutting right through her sobbing. "You systematically forged legal documents, defrauded the federal government, and hijacked a noble charity designed to house disabled veterans, using it to clean illicit cash for dangerous international cartels. You did not care who you destroyed to fund your luxurious lifestyle." The judge leaned forward, his glare pinning Sabrina to her spot. "And when your own sister uncovered your crimes, you did not ask for forgiveness. You brutally kicked a pregnant woman in the stomach out of sheer petty spite. Your complete lack of remorse and your violent tendencies make you a clear and present danger to society. Sabrina shook her head frantically, begging him to stop, but the judge raised his sentencing guidelines. It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary, the judge declared with absolute finality. This sentence will be served without the possibility of parole. Sabrina let out a blood-curdling scream as the sheer weight of 15 years behind bars crushed her. Two heavily armed United States Marshals stepped forward immediately, grabbing her by the arms and securing her wrists tightly in steel handcuffs. She thrashed against their grip, screaming for our parents to do something to save her from this nightmare. But Richard and Patricia had nothing left to give. They were bankrupt, powerless, and facing their own criminal trials for perjury and obstruction. As the marshals dragged Sabrina down the center aisle of the courtroom, pulling her toward the heavy oak doors and her new life in a federal cage, the reality of the situation finally shattered the last remaining delusion in my mother's mind. I stood up slowly from the wooden bench, resting my hand on my stomach, feeling a profound sense of closure as Nathaniel wrapped his arm around my shoulders. We turned to leave the gallery, ready to walk out into the fresh air and start our new life. Suddenly, Patricia rushed forward from the row behind me. She threw herself onto the floor right in the middle of the courtroom aisle. She fell to her knees, her expensive clothes wrinkling against the dirty floor. She reached out and grabbed my hand with trembling, desperate fingers. Tears ruined her perfectly applied makeup as she looked up at me, her eyes wide with sheer terror, and began pleading hysterically for my forgiveness. My mother's perfectly manicured fingers clawed frantically at my hand, her expensive rings digging painfully into my skin as she knelt in the center aisle of the federal courtroom. Tears ruined her heavy makeup, leaving dark, messy streaks down her cheeks. She was sobbing hysterically, begging for forgiveness, pleading with me to somehow undo the absolute devastation that had just fallen upon her golden child. Sabrina was already gone, dragged through the heavy oak doors by armed marshals to begin her 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. Now Patricia was entirely alone on the floor, stripped of her pride, her wealth, and her arrogant delusions. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a worthless burden. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I firmly pulled my hand out of her desperate grip. I did not say a word. I simply turned away, resting my hand on my 8-month pregnant belly, and walked up the aisle with Nathaniel close by my side. Two federal bailiffs immediately stepped in, pulling Patricia up by her arms and escorting her out of the gallery so we could exit the building in peace. We pushed through the heavy brass doors and walked out onto the grand stone steps of the federal courthouse. The cold Chicago wind whipped around us, a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension inside the courtroom. But our path to the parking garage was immediately blocked. Standing at the bottom of the long flight of stairs was my father. Richard looked completely destroyed. He was currently out on bail awaiting his own impending criminal trial for committing blatant perjury on the witness stand. The bespoke imported suit he wore looked rumpled and entirely too large for his rapidly shrinking frame. His face was gaunt, his eyes darting around the courthouse plaza with frantic, paranoid energy. When he saw me walking down the steps with Nathaniel, he rushed forward, completely disregarding the security details standing nearby. Patricia, having just been escorted out of the side exit by the bailiffs, stumbled over to join him. They stood together at the bottom of the steps, a pathetic, broken reflection of the powerful suburban elite they once pretended to be. "You won! Gwendolyn!" Richard choked out, his voice trembling as he blocked my path. "You destroyed your sister. You took our house. You let the government freeze every single dime we had. Are you happy now? Is your petty childhood jealousy finally satisfied?" I stopped on the steps, looking down at them from an elevated position. Even now, facing absolute ruin and federal indictments, they still clung to the delusion that my forensic investigation was born out of jealousy. They still refused to accept that their precious Sabrina was a violent, calculating criminal who had brought this entirely upon herself. "I am not celebrating, Dad," I replied, my voice steady and freezing cold. "I am simply auditing the consequences of your own choices. You built an entire life on stolen cartel money, and now the bill is due. Move out of my way." Patricia rushed forward, grabbing Richard's arm. She was shaking violently, her eyes wide with a terror that had absolutely nothing to do with the federal government. "Gwendolyn, please, you have to listen to us," she sobbed, abandoning the angry accusations and pivoting instantly to desperate begging. "The men from the Shadow Syndicate, the Russian lenders we borrowed the bail money from, they are hunting us. They know the government seized the house. They know the bank accounts are frozen. They cornered your father in a motel parking lot last night and told him if we do not hand over $500,000, plus their extortionate interest by tomorrow, they are going to kill us." Richard stepped closer, raising his hands in a frantic, pleading gesture. Nathaniel immediately stepped forward, positioning his body between my pregnant stomach and my father, silently warning him not to take another step. "We know the judge signed a restitution order," Richard pleaded, his voice cracking in absolute panic. "We were in the courtroom. We heard the judge say you are receiving $1 million from the money Sabrina wired to the government. You are a millionaire now, Gwendolyn. We are begging you. Give us a cut of the restitution money. Just give us enough to pay off the mobsters so they do not murder us in the street." I stared at them, absolutely stunned by their bottomless, selfish audacity. "You want me to give you a cut of my federal restitution?" I asked, my tone dripping with disbelief. "The money awarded to me because your golden child stole my identity, forged fraudulent loans, and violently attacked me. We are your parents!" Patricia screamed, her voice cracking as she stomped her foot on the concrete pavement. "We brought you into this world. We fed you. We paid for that boring accounting degree that you just used to ruin our lives. You owe us. You cannot just stand there and let us die." I felt a surge of cold, razor-sharp clarity wash over me. I looked at the two people who had enabled every single drop of toxicity in my life. I remembered standing in their driveway 5 years ago, crying and begging for a place to stay after my landlord raised the rent. They had slammed the door in my face, telling me I was a failure because I refused to sign my name on fraudulent credit card applications to fund Sabrina's fake fashion empire. I remembered lying on a hospital gurney just weeks ago, bleeding and terrified that my baby was dead, while they stood over me and demanded I drop the felony charges against the woman who kicked me. "You did not care if I died in that hospital room," I said, my voice echoing loudly across the courthouse plaza, silencing their frantic begging. "You did not care if your unborn grandchild survived that attack. You only cared about protecting Sabrina's fake reputation. And now that she is locked in a cage, and the cartel is coming to collect the debt you willingly signed for you, suddenly remember you are my parents." Richard fell to his knees on the cold concrete, actually clasping his hands together. "Gwendolyn, I am begging you. If you do not give us the cash, they are going to kill us tonight. We will do anything. We will disappear. We will never ask you for another thing as long as we live. Please, you cannot let us die." I looked down at my father groveling on the pavement. I did not reach for my checkbook. I did not offer them a single dime of the money that rightfully belonged to me and my growing family. Instead, I reached into the breast pocket of my maternity blazer. I pulled out a single plain white piece of paper. I unfolded it and held it out toward my mother. Patricia snatched it from my hand, her eyes darting across the page, expecting to see bank routing numbers or a certified check. Instead, her face fell in utter confusion. "What is this?" she asked, her hands shaking. "This is just an address." I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression utterly devoid of mercy. "That is the address of a federal witness protection intake office," I stated coldly. "The Department of Justice is actively building a massive racketeering case against the syndicate you borrowed money from. If you walk into that office right now and agree to turn state's evidence providing full, unredacted testimony against the cartel, the United States government will keep you alive. They will put you in protective custody, relocate you, and give you new identities." Richard stared at this paper, his mouth hanging open in horror. "Turn state's evidence," he gasped. "We will be looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives. We will have to live like fugitives. We will lose everything. You already lost everything." I corrected him, my voice sharp and final. "That piece of paper is your only lifeline. You can take it, cooperate with the federal agents, and live out the rest of your days in obscurity. But know this, if you walk through those intake doors, you will be permanently relocated. You will never be allowed to contact anyone from your past life again, which means you will never see me or my child ever again. It had been exactly 1 month since I stood on the cold concrete steps of the federal courthouse and watched my parents face the absolute destruction of their own making. I was officially 39 weeks pregnant, carrying a heavy physical burden, but feeling lighter in my soul than I had in 3 decades. I was at home folding tiny soft cotton onesies in the freshly painted nursery when the first sharp, undeniable contraction seized my lower back. I gripped the edge of the wooden changing table, inhaling a ragged breath as the pain radiated through my pelvis. Nathaniel was downstairs in his home office reviewing a stack of complex legal briefs. I called out his name, my voice tight with sudden urgency. Within seconds, I heard his heavy, rapid footsteps taking the hardwood stairs 2 at a time. The drive to the hospital was a blur of focused, quiet intensity. Nathaniel did not panic, nor did he offer useless platitudes. He operated with the exact same cool, calculated efficiency that made him such a formidable presence in his courtroom. He navigated the downtown Chicago traffic swiftly, his jaw set in a hard line of absolute determination. By the time we reached the maternity ward, my contractions were coming fast and incredibly hard. Nathaniel traded his usual impeccably tailored charcoal suit for a set of baggy pale blue hospital scrubs. He stood right beside my hospital bed, holding my hand with a grounding, solid strength. He was my unshakable foundation, completely unfazed by the clinical chaos of the delivery room. For the first few hours, the labor progressed steadily. The nurses monitored my vitals, and I focused entirely on my breathing, drawing comfort from Nathaniel's unwavering gaze. However, the atmosphere in the room shifted abruptly and dramatically when the attending obstetrician furrowed her brow. She stepped closer to the monitors, her expression turning deadly serious. The rhythmic galloping sound of the fetal monitor suddenly dipped. The loud, reassuring beat turned erratic, sluggish, and dangerously quiet. The doctor immediately called for a portable ultrasound machine to be wheeled into the room. She pressed the transducer against my stomach, her eyes scanning the dark screen with intense concentration. She explained, her voice professional, but laced with urgent concern, that the blunt force trauma I had sustained months earlier was causing a severe complication. The brutal targeted kick Sabrina had delivered to my stomach during our mother's birthday party had caused a buildup of thick internal scar tissue along the lower uterine wall. Now, as the baby descended into the birth canal, that dense scar tissue was actively restricting the necessary expansion. It was essentially acting as a physical barricade, compressing the umbilical cord and causing acute fetal distress. Panic surged through my chest, cold and suffocating. The trauma my sister had inflicted was reaching out from her federal prison cell, making one last desperate attempt to steal my joy. The delivery room was suddenly flooded with extra medical personnel. A nurse clamped an oxygen mask securely over my nose and mouth, instructing me to take deep, rapid breaths. The harsh fluorescent lights above me seemed to blur as the pain intensified, mixing with sheer terror for my unborn child. Nathaniel leaned in close, his face just inches from mine. He gripped both of my hands, his eyes blazing with fierce protective power. "You are safe," he whispered, his voice cutting clearly through the noise and the fear. "You are both safe. Do not let her win. Focus on me." The doctor moved to the foot of the bed, her voice rising above the alarm bells ringing from the monitors. "We need to move this baby past the restricted tissue right now," she commanded. "On the next contraction, you have to push with absolutely everything you possess." I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping Nathaniel's hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. I gathered every single ounce of strength I had cultivated over the past agonizing year. I thought of the fraudulent loans, the money laundering, the manipulation, and the endless years of being treated like a worthless outcast. I channeled all of that lingering rage, transforming it into a fierce, primal desire to protect my child from the darkness of my family's past. As the next contraction peaked, I pushed through the searing, blinding agony with a guttural cry. The suffocating tension in the room broke completely with the sudden, miraculous sound of a sharp, piercing wail. The heavy relief in the delivery room was palpable, washing over everyone present like a physical wave. The doctor smiled broadly, lifting a tiny, warm, perfectly healthy baby girl and placing her directly onto my chest. I pulled my daughter close, wrapping my trembling arms around her fragile, slippery body. She was breathing perfectly, her cries strong and full of life. Nathaniel buried his face in my hair, his broad shoulders shaking slightly as he wept tears of absolute joy and overwhelming relief. I looked down at my daughter, brushing a damp curl from her tiny forehead. In that beautiful, quiet moment, a profound and unshakable realization settled deep into my bones. The cycle of toxic generational abuse that had poisoned my bloodline for decades was finally permanently broken. My daughter would never know the conditional love, the fierce, petty jealousy, or the cruel financial manipulation I had grown up with. She would never be used as a pawn or cast aside as a scapegoat. She would only know absolute safety, fierce protection, and unconditional love. The next morning, bright sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of my private recovery suite. I was sitting up in bed cradling my sleeping daughter when a soft knock sounded at the heavy wooden door. It swung open and Donovan stepped into the room. My brother-in-law looked completely revitalized. The heavy, suffocating burden of Sabrina's criminal betrayal had visibly lifted from his shoulders. He was dressed in a casual but sharp button-down shirt, his posture relaxed and his smile entirely genuine. He walked over to the side of the hospital bed, gazing down at his new niece with deep, quiet affection. I could not bring a generic stuffed animal to celebrate a moment like this, Donovan said, his deep voice rich with warmth. He reached under his arm and handed me a large, carefully rolled-up tube of thick premium drafting paper. I carefully unrolled the thick parchment, my eyes widening as I took in the incredibly detailed, masterful lines drawn across the page. It was a stunning custom-made architectural blueprint for a state-of-the-art children's nursery and playroom, perfectly customized to fit the dimensions of our home. The weeks following my daughter's birth settled into a quiet, beautiful rhythm. Our home, once threatened by the dark shadow of my family's criminal greed, was now filled with the soft, soothing sounds of new life. Nathaniel and I spent our evenings in the custom nursery. Donovan had designed a space filled with light and warmth. But outside our peaceful sanctuary, the brutal machinery of consequence was systematically grinding the remains of my toxic family into dust. I did not need to actively seek out information about Richard and Patricia. The federal network operates with ruthless efficiency, and the ripple effects of their choices were impossible to ignore. Faced with the terrifying reality of a bloodthirsty Russian syndicate hunting them down for $500,000, my parents had taken the only lifeline I had offered them. They had walked into the Federal Witness Protection Intake Office, surrendered their entire identities, and turned state's evidence against the cartel. Their new reality was a staggering, permanent fall from grace. They were completely stripped of their bespoke designer suits, their imported luxury vehicles, and their exclusive country club memberships. Now they were known by generic fabricated names relocated by the government to a dreary, dust-choked town in the absolute middle of nowhere. I could easily picture Patricia, a woman who once threw a vicious tantrum over the wrong vintage of imported champagne, now wearing a stiff polyester uniform, wiping down sticky laminate tables at a roadside diner for minimum wage. I imagined Richard, who used to boast loudly to anyone who would listen about his golf handicap and his financial superiority, now sweeping the floors of a local hardware store, his posture permanently hunched under the weight of his own failures. They were living in a cramped, poorly insulated apartment where the heating barely worked in the winter. They spent every single day jumping in absolute terror every time a car drove past their window a little too slowly. They had traded their gilded cage of dirty money for a prison of perpetual paranoia, constantly looking over their shoulders, knowing the cartel never truly forgives or forgets. They had completely lost me, their granddaughter, and their precious social status, all to save their own cowardly skins. They were alive, but their lives were entirely devoid of anything that mattered to them. Sabrina was faring even worse. She had been processed into a stark, high-security federal penitentiary, a brutal concrete fortress that stripped away every single ounce of her manufactured glamour. Her tailored pink suits had been confiscated and replaced by a stiff, scratchy khaki uniform. The woman who used to spend thousands of dollars a week on hair extensions, chemical peels, and manicures was now handed a coarse bristle brush and a heavy plastic bucket of harsh chemical bleach. Her assigned daily duty was scrubbing the communal cell block toilets. Of course, Sabrina's staggering arrogance did not evaporate the moment the heavy iron doors locked behind her. According to the prison incident logs that occasionally crossed my desk at the Department of Justice, she had immediately tried to assert her dominance in the yard. During her very first week, she attempted to order around a seasoned inmate, loudly proclaiming that she was a wealthy, high-profile entrepreneur who did not belong in the same room as common criminals. Her delusions of grandeur were instantly and aggressively shattered. She was cornered in the prison laundry room, shoved hard against a cinder block wall, and violently reminded of her absolute insignificance at the bottom of the prison food chain. She spent her days scrubbing porcelain and her nights crying quietly on a thin, lumpy mattress surrounded by women who did not care about her fake designer bags or her fabricated wealth. She was entirely powerless, stripped of the unearned privilege that had shielded her for 30 years. Out in the real world, the digital empire Sabrina had sacrificed everything to build was being systematically erased by the federal government. The Department of Justice seized her boutique's domain name, replacing her glossy storefront website with a stark black and white notice of federal asset seizure. Her social media accounts, the very lifeblood of her narcissistic existence, were completely wiped from the internet. Millions of fake followers vanished instantly. Every carefully curated photo, every boastful video, every piece of her manufactured reality was deleted into the digital ether. It was as if Sabrina's influential persona had never existed at all. The legacy she had violently kicked me to protect was reduced to a blank screen. I sat at my kitchen island, the morning sun streaming through the large glass windows, illuminating the pristine marble countertops. My baby girl was sleeping soundly in a bassinet nearby, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. I opened my encrypted laptop, sipping a hot cup of coffee as I pulled up the morning news briefing. The lead story on the national broadcast detailed a massive, highly coordinated federal sweep, taking down a notorious Eastern European money laundering syndicate operating out of the Midwest. The news anchor confidently reported that the sprawling criminal network had been dismantled from the top down, thanks to the crucial, highly classified testimony of two anonymous cooperating witnesses. I stared at the screen, watching the aerial footage of cartel bosses being led away from a warehouse in heavy steel handcuffs. The violent syndicate that had threatened my life, extorted my parents, and bankrolled my sister's vanity was entirely destroyed. I reached out, resting my hand gently on my sleeping daughter's warm cheek, feeling the soft rhythm of her breathing. I looked back at the screen one last time, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace wash over my entire being. I closed the laptop with a soft, definitive click. The past was dead. Exactly 1 year passed since the day I closed my laptop on the ashes of my past. I stood in the sunlit kitchen of our Chicago home, watching our healthy 1-year-old daughter smash avocado onto her high-chair tray. Nathaniel walked in, adjusting the collar of his crisp navy suit. He leaned down to kiss her messy cheek before crossing the kitchen to kiss mine. There was no tension in our house anymore. No looming threats from international syndicates, no predatory loan sharks lurking in the driveway, and absolutely no toxic family members demanding money they did not earn. The relentless anxiety that had defined my life for more than 30 years had evaporated entirely. There was only absolute, unfiltered peace. My maternity leave had ended a few months prior, and my return to the Department of Justice was marked by a massive, undeniable shift in my career. I no longer sat in a gray, windowless cubicle, hiding my extensive expertise behind a low-level security clearance. I now occupied a sprawling corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the downtown city skyline. I had been officially promoted to the director of the Financial Crimes Unit. The promotion was a direct, well-earned result of my meticulous work dismantling the massive laundering ring that my sister Sabrina had foolishly thought she could control. My new role allowed me to lead national task forces utilizing my forensic accounting skills to track down and prosecute the most elusive white-collar criminals in the country. Nathaniel experienced a similar highly prestigious trajectory of success. His unshakable composure and brilliant legal mind during the entire harrowing ordeal with my family had caught the attention of the highest levels of the federal judiciary. Just 3 weeks ago, I stood proudly beside him in a packed courtroom as he placed his hand on a leather-bound Bible and was officially sworn in for a highly coveted seat on the federal appellate court. We had both reached the absolute pinnacle of our respective careers. We did not achieve this by cheating, stealing, or stepping on other people, but through sheer relentless dedication to the truth. The culmination of this triumphant year took place on a crisp Friday evening in November at the annual Department of Justice Honors Gala. The event was held in the grand ballroom of a historic downtown hotel, a venue far more elegant and prestigious than any suburban country club my parents used to frequent. I wore a tailored, deep emerald gown that projected quiet, undeniable power. There were no counterfeit designer bags, no flashy sports cars, and no stolen diamonds on my arm. I had learned the hard way that true wealth and true power do not ever need to scream for attention. As we walked through the glittering ballroom, we were greeted with genuine respect and admiration by federal prosecutors, seasoned investigators, and top-tier legal minds. Standing near the center table, looking healthier and more vibrant than I had ever seen him, was Donovan. My former brother-in-law had completely rebuilt his life from the devastating wreckage Sabrina left behind. Free from her toxic financial drain and her constant manipulation, his nonprofit organization had secured massive legitimate federal grants. He was now running a multi-million-dollar charity building entire communities of mortgage-free, fully accessible homes for disabled veterans across the Midwest. He greeted us with a warm, genuine hug, his eyes shining with pure joy as he admired his 1-year-old niece who was babbling happily in Nathaniel's strong arms. Midway through the evening, the master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone and called my name. I walked up to the brightly lit podium to accept an award for excellence in federal financial investigations. I looked out over the sea of respected professionals, feeling a profound sense of belonging. I did not use a teleprompter or a rehearsed script. I spoke directly from the heart. I told the silent, captivated room that white-collar crime is far too often dismissed as a victimless offense, a simple, harmless shuffling of numbers on a digital screen. But I explained that the reality is far more insidious and destructive. Financial fraud destroys honest charities' funds, violent international syndicates, and shatters the very foundation of trust within our communities. I declared that holding white-collar criminals absolutely accountable, regardless of their social standing, their wealth, or even their blood relation to the investigator, is the ultimate cornerstone of a just and functioning society. As I spoke those final words, I looked past the bright stage lights and locked eyes with the two people who mattered most in the world. I saw Donovan, a man who had his life's work nearly destroyed by unfathomable greed, now nodding at me with profound, unspoken respect. I saw Nathaniel standing tall and proud in his tailored tuxedo, cradling our beautiful smiling daughter safely against his chest. In that perfect crystal-clear moment, the ultimate realization washed over me. I finally understood that my secret weapon against my family had never really been my forensic accounting skills, my federal security clearance, or my ability to track hidden offshore accounts. My true weapon had always been my unshakable integrity. I never had to stoop to their level of manipulation. I never had to scream or throw a tantrum or plot a petty illegal revenge. I simply stood my ground, upheld the law, and allowed their own boundless greed and breathtaking arrogance to completely destroy them. I thanked the audience, stepping down from the stage to the sound of deafening, genuine applause. I walked straight into my husband's arms, kissing him deeply before pressing my forehead against my daughter's warm, soft hair. The dark, suffocating chapter of my toxic family was permanently closed, leaving nothing behind but absolute peaceful triumph. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your peace, let me know in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about surviving betrayal and building a beautiful life on your own terms. Remember, you never have to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. Your integrity is your greatest armor. The most profound lesson from Gwendolyn's journey is that true vindication never requires stooping to the level of your abusers. When faced with relentless manipulation and staggering betrayal, her greatest weapon was not a vengeful scheme, but her unshakable integrity and absolute command of the truth. By establishing ironclad boundaries and simply allowing the law to operate, she let her family's boundless greed engineer their own downfall. This story teaches us that walking away from toxic generational cycles is not a defeat, but the ultimate victory. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below.